Hi. I want to talk about macrocosmic embodiment. And this is going to be a little rabbit traily, a little bit stream of consciousness, as with a lot of my stuff. But I realized recently that I've touched on the concept of macrocosmic embodiment, and it's on my website, and like I mention it and I touch on it, but I haven't actually done a proper video just like about the concept of macrocosmic embodiment and what it means and why it is such an integral term in my work, especially in recent culminations and shifts into the macro symposium, for obvious reasons. It's connected. And so Fiesta is a big fan of macrocosmic embodiment, which she is the color mascot, the closest color mascot to macrocosmic embodiment, which shows up as a golden color, kind of like this, on my website when it's featuring a heavy dose of macrocosmic embodiment work. So macrocosmic embodiment is essentially what I have been in the process of being trained in for several years now. And it is the practice of wielding the primordial soul framework, which is the framework that I was trained in for conceptualizing and mapping and interacting with the macrocosmos, the microcosm, like anything from a micro soul, like an individual, like my soul, Fiesta's soul, or that of a multi-consciousness form, like our planet or a universe. And so I spent several years, since 2020, being trained in that. And through that, or especially in the early days in particular, I was being trained by my spirit mentors, mostly astrally and through channeling and communication, in these techniques for accessing these primordial soul framework concepts and states of being and methods and processes of accessing these systems across like astral dimensions, essentially. And I had a background in eclectic witchcraft, but mostly in mental health, working in mental health. I did have a concentration in complementary and alternative healthcare, and one of my main mentors, psychology professors, was Reiki master, Tai Chi master, Eden energy medicine master. I don't know if a master, I don't know about that word, but I don't know if that's involved with that, but he was a teacher, whatever, with that. Incorporated a lot of that into my perceptions of mental health and a more holistic and integrative health conceptualization. And so I practice more on the pagan, again, eclectic side in my personal witchcraft practice, mostly working with herbs, a little bit of divination, but crystals, and a lot of research and that kind of thing. But I did also do meditation, and so I practiced that semi-regularly while working out and about in the world. And that was kind of my background. I did practice Tai Chi a bit, but I did 3 years of it in college, but I did fall off the bandwagon a little bit with consistency in that over the years. But that was, part of my background. So I had kind of been having these experiences over years that were gradually expanding my consciousness perception and my point of view, and I was kind of diversifying and exploring and settling deeper into my my sovereignty and my my energy after having like a pretty rough background growing up. And so around the time that I started becoming trained in all of this, it really was it was really, I would say self-led, but it really was spirit guide led and self-led at the same time. It was really a very interactive process between me and my spirit mentors, where it went from one day I woke up, went into a trance, went into meditation, and had my first out-of-body, like full out-of-body experience. And then from there on, that was like in the very early 2020, March, April 2020, maybe sooner. Sometime, it was around this time of year actually, something like that. And I have the journals with the dates somewhere. And so from that point on, I went from just having this vague intuitive vibe of my spirit mentors, enough to recognize their energy and their resonance when they kind of began showing themselves a lot more viscerally. But they started training me in these techniques, essentially. And I did have some experiences with some other practitioners where I took some smaller classes for like light body work and energy sensing and some little things like that. But for the most part, I was mostly trained by my spirit mentors. And so they would teach me the specific frame of view for accessing these different energy fields, these different parts of myself, for building up my capacity to access these different energies and things. And I constantly have these experiences over the years where I will start telling somebody about a technique or a process that I do, a part of my framework perception or whatever, and they'll be like, oh, that reminds me of X, Y, and Z technique that is from this tradition or from X, Y, and Z. And that's always very interesting and validating to me in a lot of ways, because it's something that I channeled and received either astrally, like up in the astrals interacting with my guides in the astral realms, or like receiving more like a download channeling from them. And so it's something that I find over the years is kind of this unexpectedly unifying framework and practice that weaves kind of effortlessly into pre-existing traditions and pre-existing practices, but has this interesting way of, like, without really fully realizing it, the more you interact with the practices and the more you work with them, they have this way of pushing those boundaries and pushing those these limits that you didn't realize were encoded in those practices, that were extremely freeing and that have these extremely illuminating and awakening and expanding concepts, but there's just something about them that is intangible and that I can't quite put into words, that when you work with it over time, it it starts to weave the expansion further and in more complex and nuanced directions than anything else that I have come across. And I think it's so powerful because it works so well in addition to, like, and I'm just thinking on it now because I made the connection earlier of having the background in complementary and alternative healthcare. And a core facet of that is that you're supposed to be able to weave and meld mental health, physical health, and spiritual health all together, and that there should be a way of, there should be complementary care interaction across the different scopes, and they should all be able to communicate with each other and kind of lend into each other, and so that it makes the entire practice much more powerful when you have them all melded into one. That's one of the core kind of facets of integrative healthcare or complementary and alternative healthcare, is usually this idea of weaving in all of the different practices to make a more spherical and more whole healthcare regime. And that was I always expected to be starting my business eventually as a on the licensed clinical counselor side, and did not realize I would be here on the spiritual side so heavily. And so I'm realizing that I've always kind of been building up to different layers of this macrocosmic embodiment, of this practice, of this vision that is kind of mapped into my soul path for this incarnation, and that I've just, over the years, which is very macrocosmic embodiment coded, over the years I've just kind of been expanding and complexifying my view of, and my ability to more clearly recognize and discern and comprehend and describe and enact this vision and this expression of my authenticity. And so that's really what's behind macrocosmic embodiment, and what's behind all spiritual concepts for the most part, is this drive to pursue this moreness and this more peaceful and harmonious union of self and the whole that everyone across our entire planetary reality have these different traditions and beliefs and cultural pursuits of this concept, and they've all been put into these different words and these different lenses, and all of these views and all of these different lenses really fall within the sphere of truth, within this singular, unifying, primordial pursuit, essentially, of understanding your unique lens of this collision of origin and totality and the complexity within, and what you feel inspired and curiosity driven and bliss ignited to pursue within that. And that is kind of the primordial essence of everything. And so I think what does differentiate and expand the concept of macrocosmic embodiment, if I have to try and differentiate it for more clarity, is that it is it is really rooted in this idea of spherical expansion and this drive towards complexification. And it's something that I've kind of gathered different pieces of the sphere for over past years, and have only recently started to figure out how to kind of put it into words, because it is so exactly like everything else, and yet the subtle differences are what's so important about it. And so I think I have to talk about, I have to rabbit trail into this subcoding behind the concept of ascension. We'll use that as kind of the unifying word, because it's kind of what's more of the hot button terminology in the collective right now. But you see the concept of ascension in pretty much every single culture, in some form or fashion. In some form or fashion, there is some concept of this process happening. And then it's within the complexity of the details that it gets shifted into these different words and themes and focuses. But there's this subcoding behind all of them that the movement of this process of evolution or transition or ascension retains this subcoded limitation that the closest way I can put it into a metaphor is like the only options are an elevator shaft. And this, I know this is simplifying, but this is the best way to kind of describe the subcoding, the undercurrent, and the micro coding and limitations behind it. Is that it's an inherently subtle underwriting, but it's like all of the processes moving from, we're moving from 3D to 4D, or 3D to 5D, or 3D to 7D, or 3D to 28D, or we're going to heaven, or we're going to hell. All of these different conceptualizations, or we're elevating to new earth, or whatever, we're separating to that, we're splitting, we're either going to like split to this one or this one. Like there's this inherent polarity system that is locked in this very linear momentum that is very much kind of like an elevator shaft, where even the subcoding behind our terminology and our rhetoric and our vision of breaking out of the polarity limitations are still within this energetic encoding of this very linear polarity-like flow of energy, of momentum, of expansion, of evolution. And it's something that I've always had this weird like resistance to. I used to get really triggered about some of the concepts of ascension and stuff like that. I'm a lot more neutral about it now, but it is because there are a lot of roots within the discourse where the collective goes into very extremist or Yeah, we'll just keep it at that. It has the potential to shift into these extremist views that are very specialized and singular in their focus. And a lot of that ties into this other layer behind this subcoding, behind our perception of the process of evolution, the process of becoming more harmonious and more, however you want to put it, transitioning into something else. And there's the other layer behind this that is tied to this polarity undercoding, that is this concept of, especially behind more New Age conceptions of New Age, but New Age conceptions of ascension or whatever, or transitioning to New Earth, or raising to another dimensional layer or whatever, where it's very much, especially with like the split in Earth, or especially with more things related to like politics going on right now or whatever. There's this conception that's underwritten between our discourse and our language and our relationship in community, that, well, if I can just make you become more like me, or if I can just get you to, if we can all just be like this, then everything will be better. And while that, there's a lot of well-intentioned benefit to this kind of idea of that we should be open to influence and mutual influence amongst each other, there's this underwriting of evolution and a good outcome, a harmonious and evolved outcome. The good outcome that I am rooting for is that there is more sameness. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that conceptualization, but I think that what I have learned is that there's a lot of value in very intentionally expanding that language and expanding the visualizations and intentionally looking to move beyond that subcoding that my team was helping me to do before I even realized that's what was happening. And what I think a lot of our practices are helping us to do, but there's this block that we get to. And so what is so helpful about that metaphor, about it being like of this subcoding that we're trapped within when thinking about evolution and moving into more harmonious, authentic, abundant, etc. experiences, more of an experience that is more free and more empowering, etc. That is the encoded, not problem, but we'll keep it at that, encoded problem behind it right now, that behind that elevator shaft, because there's nothing inherently wrong with that. There are some functions, some soul body incarnations, some experiences where that is exactly what you need. And what I have been kind of opened up to realize, though, is that this actually reflects our soul mechanism capacity. And I promise this is all tied to macrocosmic embodiment. I promise. All of these rabbit trails are interconnected. And so when I kind of had this aha visualization, it connected a bunch of other dots for me, and connected a bunch of webs and threads. And I realized that it connected with another complication I've had with discussing a lot of my work. And that is something that I realized in the first year or two of my training and my work. When I was, of course, vaguely aware of the westernized conceptualization of chakras. And so when I first started exploring going into business, when I was back in the Seekers Evolving days, I had this back and forth on using the words and the different terms for the chakras when talking about my energy healing and what I was doing and what I was addressing. Because I realized that what I was seeing and what I was interacting with and the systems that I was being trained to work with in my energy healing didn't match up. And they also didn't really match up to the 3 cauldron system. And they kind of matched up a little bit to the meridian system, but also not quite. And I had a feeling that they probably matched up closer to the actual traditional, like, expanded version of chakras. But that didn't feel right at the time for me to go into a deep dive into learning that system. Because I was also in the process of being trained in energy weaving, which is a modality with a whole framework and system and process and everything that technically at the time nobody else was teaching, nobody else was wielding, nobody else was doing in the way that I was doing it as a specific modality. And so I was like, I had a lot of back and forth about that, especially, and as I became more trained in it, Chaos Child Lynx has also come to visit now. We're just having a whole pass through of all the fur children. And so what I realized is I was kind of starting to anchor the soul mechanism system into a translatable perception, because there's a big difference in experiencing and knowing and interacting with something astrally versus explaining what that was you were just doing astrally in the human language and through the body. That's a whole different skill set. And so I realized that at least the Western conceptualization of chakras, the main ones, for the most part, they all basically fit within one mechanism system. And I mean, I've consciously worked with hundreds of them. Without being able to specify, I've worked with billions of soul mechanisms. But I've actually taught about or translated or interacted and whatever dozens and dozens of soul mechanisms. But I realized that for the most part, all of the westernized conceptualizations of chakras all fit basically within one soul mechanism system, the authenticity core, which is a more complex version of essentially the Hara line, which, if you approximate it to a physical body, you would say runs through the spine. Well, it's really most of the physical body. And the entire, like I said, the entire westernized conceptualization of chakras basically fit into this one mechanism system, which, that's what I was going to say, which basically looks like an elevator shaft. And so, this concept of what I perceive to be a very simplified conceptualization of the auric field. Most people view an auric field to be one layer, or maybe a layer for each chakra or something like that, but a relatively simple echo kind of energy of the chakra systems and the physical bodies, energy field or whatever. And I couldn't be misrepresenting that, because again, I am purposefully not an expert on most of these other traditions. I've kind of been a jack of all trades, where I am vaguely aware of them, but I specifically try not to delve too deep into them, because I don't want to unintentionally take from other cultural stuff. If I naturally channel and download information that correlates with these other traditions, then that's super cool and actually super validating for me. But I try not to delve so deep that I start imprinting the information and just copying it. And so this kind of way of relating to information that I have kind of developed over the years has kind of allowed me to have this kind of purposeful balance of being at least semi-aware of these concepts to be able to refer to, or to discuss with clients. A lot of times I find out about these concepts, because my clients are trained in them, and so we'll have that dialogue and exchange about it. So I love when that's how I learn about these kind of things. But anyway, so throughout all this process, I was being trained in these techniques that were what I now call macrocosmic embodiment techniques. And it wasn't till a couple of years or so into things that I always kind of got interesting reactions from other practitioners when I would receive an Akashic Records session or something. I could tell some stories about some of the experiences I've had. But yeah, for the most part, it was about a couple of years in, especially in this last year, but starting a couple of years in, when practitioners, especially ones who had no real concept of the work that I do, the fact that I work with soul mechanisms, the fact that some of them didn't even know anything really about me, where practitioners would do a session on me, and they would basically be confused, either because of things that their spirit guides were saying, or just purely because they would realize that my energy body flows and functions in a different way. And that, I mean, sometimes they would be guided to specific obvious places where I needed to work on clearing or harmonizing or activating X, Y, and Z, definitely not saying I have a perfect energy body, but they would be like, no, they're like, this isn't because your energy is fucked up. They'd be like, it's not because it's, damaged, or like that it's super dysregulated, or they like it seems to be extremely harmonious and activated, and like this is like really flow. Like, yeah, there's X, Y, and Z that I'm balancing out, or that your guides told me to do X, Y, and Z for, but they're like, it just doesn't the math isn't mathing in the way that the math usually maths. And so it really took me technically until this started happening with some practitioners that one in particular that can like almost like precisely see the mechanism structures, maybe not perfectly, but I imagine with like repeated practice they have this knack for seeing the mechanism systems. They're a Reiki practitioner, and it's been really interesting comparing and contrasting with their teachings in Reiki and my teachings. But I've come to the determination that technically my guides have been telling me for years, but it just wasn't quite clicking and wasn't quite settling, that I have mechanism, like this work that I have been doing, these techniques and these processes and this framework I have been working with, and all of these facets that I've spent several years developing my capacity for. This macrocosmic embodiment training was unlocking these other soul mechanism systems in my energy body. In particular, I had a really significant event, I believe spring 2022, which was around the time, I think, that the primordial soul framework, I realized that the universe mapping, the soul mechanisms, and all the other different things that I thought were separate trainings were all of a sudden, I was like, oh, they're all the same. Yeah, so it was kind of around that same time frame where I had a total change in the way that my energy body processed breath, and that's a core facet of macrocosmic embodiment. That is this subtle but significant expansion and shift. But I've started to like piece together all of these different times where it was like, oh yeah, that did happen, didn't it? Some of these were happening during my hermit era and stuff too, and so now on the other side of it, emerged and interacting with the collective again, I'm just like, oh, okay, so this is what I have. This is what I have been gathering in the cave, all these codes and these patterns and things. And so it was around the time that I was shifting into Macro Symposium that I was downloading the Macrocosmic Embodiment transition, and I was also downloading the Remerging attunements and beginning to caretake that. And we were also in the beginning stages of the Cohesion event around the time Macrocosmic Embodiment as a term really anchored as a like, this is the term, this is the one that you're going to use. And it was around the same time that the early stages of the Cohesion event were happening. There were some primordial portals happening. I have some videos around somewhere of me talking about it. Between October and November 22nd, I think, of 2024, that was when the point of no return hit for the macrocosmic embodiment stage, essentially. And is also when the opening happened for the Cohesion event. I didn't know it at the time. That was bringing this in. So all of this has basically brought it to the point where now it is time. Like, I've been kind of pre-tinkering with teaching clients and students and people in my social sphere and communities about the different fractals, the different pieces of macrocosmic embodiment, but it's been through a culmination of all of this that has been happening in the last few months, and then the official shift in a macro symposium, where it was like, okay, now it's like the collective is now ready fully for this. And so before, there was this subcoding behind all of our perceptions and processes and language around evolution and kind of evolving into more of our uniqueness, more of our soul capacity. And it's as simple and as complicated as moving from this evolution into this contradictory collision that expands our collective and our individual complexity, and it expands it spherically and to a complex and a nuanced degree. And I know it's very wordy for the concept, and I have written out in other places it in more concise language. So when you get me talking like this, it's the stream of conscious rabbit trails. And so macrocosmic embodiment is inherently, it's the whole vibe behind the primordial energy that I work with, the framework, my entire vision and stuff behind my work, especially in recent years as it's evolved, is this helping to embrace the complexity within your origin and totality, this drive towards curiosity and complexification, because as I was trained in soul mechanisms by soul surgeons and architects and all these other beings, my own soul memories, is that the metric by which you gauge a soul's evolution beyond the construct of linearity of time, be in a spherical view, not a linear progression. It's through the metric of complexification, through the process of that soul going from its origin, its most simplest, most concentrated, most amalgamated and root essences of its unique expression of primordial archetypes that inherently have also its totality metrics, expanding, and the unique path of complexity that they travel throughout that to diversify and complexify and expand and create these new parts of themselves within, which become the soul mechanisms that have these foundational systems, but also these unfathomably infinite potentials of constructions within them. And so that's really the concept behind macrocosmic embodiment, is that you're seeking to spherically be in both contradictory collision and complexified expansion at once. And that's your pursuit through the guiding force of your curiosity and the pursuit for continual uncovering of that moreness within yourself and the totality. And there's so much more behind it, but that's really like at its core what macrocosmic embodiment is. And it has unlocked like an unfathomable amount of knowledge that is just deeply embodied and presently accessible. More knowledge than I could ever even fathom translating within the remainder of this lifetime. Like, it would be inconceivable to even try to translate every single bit of it. But I am simply in the pursuit through the Macro Symposium to translate what is most important to archive and spread into the collective from all of this knowledge that I have tapped into from expanding my sphere of connections, unlocking these other soul mechanism capacities and potentials. And so many of the soul mechanisms, they link to these concepts of the chakras, but it's almost like the chakras are the aura of the soul mechanism. Not precisely, but that's almost like the energy where there's, and I can go into the mechanics of it, and I will in through the Macro Symposium projects, but there's so much complexity, capacity within your soul body that is kind of mashed and shoved into your energy body. But there's so much more in your soul body potential that you have the capacity to wield and tap into, that you're just barely scratching the surface. And Earth also, our energy bodies are a reflection of the damage done to our planet, and our planet's energy body reflecting in the constructed bodies that are made from our planet's body is why we're not tapping into our soul body potentials, our full, complex, spherical expansion of evolution that we have the potential to. Why we're trapped in this, every time I do this, why we're trapped in this elevator shaft perception of evolution instead of this spherical, conscious, intentional perception and wielding of expansion. And that's what we have been working on behind the scenes, me and so many others, is helping to repair the Earth's energy body, and it is in the point of no return to being repaired. That's part of what the cohesion event was really, it was already anchored, but the cohesion event was really like, okay, it's really game on at this point. And that was really activating a lot in our auric fields and a lot of the auric related mechanism connections and expansions, and opening up our ability for us to begin to, as a collective, unlock these other soul mechanisms, which is partially what I'm here to do. But there's so much nuance and possibility within Macrocosmic Embodiment that I am so excited to explore. It's really about unlocking this much more complex and expansive soul wisdom that we have the potential to wield. And so Macrocosmic Embodiment comes up throughout every single facet of the Macro Symposium, every single facet of my work. It is an undercurrent to all of it. It is the practice, the wielding, the purpose behind some of the more cat chaos, the more logical or structured information. The chaos, literally the Lynx, the one who embodies the chaos timeline, came in with the chaos timeline. He is wreaking chaos, but with the chaos timeline, though, it brought in the point of no return for us to reach macrocosmic embodiment again, and to remember these soul mechanisms, which is, I definitely got off track, but it's what I'm here to do. It's what my whole kind of behind the scenes purpose is. I've even seen other practitioners begin explaining and talking about these other things that they're seeing, and so it's my hope that I can help to provide a primordial framework for exploring these concepts, for for kind of moving out of this elevator shaft of evolution perception into a more spherical expansion. And this, whenever I refer to a sphere, it's always with the conception of it representing and being a representational archetype for totality. So when we work with spherical concepts, right links, we are tapping into our totality and the complexity within and our ability to wield this. And so when you see my soul language and song weavings and energy weavings, but especially my song weavings and my aura somas, which are tapping into the complexity within your auric field that is largely untapped by the collective perception and practices, and song weaving, which is using the soul language that's speaking directly to your soul. That part of my practice, when you see the greens especially, that is really focusing on waking up your macrocosmic embodiment, waking up your soul mechanisms, waking up these dormant connections to these other lost parts of yourself and parts of your totality, that through that soul language, through light language or soul language, and that encoded communication that inherently speaks beyond the barriers of the English language, and so that it bypasses the limitations of that. And so when you kind of want to explore this concept without thinking so hard cognitively, and you just kind of want to receive the wisdom and to receive the integration and receive the knowing of how to expand your macrocosmic embodiment field, you will look for that. When you see the more golden yellow tones, it's more direct, intensive, either one-on-one or re-merging attunement style macrocosmic embodiment activation. And it's like when you want to be submerged in macrocosmic embodiment initiation. And then the purple, that's when you're going to, when you see that, especially with School of Primordiality and primordial coded information with the purple, that's when you want to dive into the mechanics and you want to explore the interdimensional expansive community. You want to connect, you want to expand your ability to more cognitively explore these concepts. You want to really nurture your curiosity and delve into the whys and the hows and the intricacies of the primordial soul framework, the framework and system behind the macrocosmic embodiment practice. And so I'm so excited that we have reached a level in the collective and in my own practice and work where there is a cohesion event brought it, I guess. There is a cohesive understanding of what this all means and the interconnected reality and practice and potential of what we are moving into collectively and as individuals and as a macrocosmic community, that we are expanding and exploring and complexifying our potential. So I hope that illuminated some insight for you, sparked your perceptions and your curiosity and your intentions to expand, and with the harassment that my chaos child is wreaking because he wants to have playtime. I'm gonna take that as the cue to close this out, take a break, invoke some play to transmute the tension. Everything is a contradictory collision. That's how you find harmony, is by finding the 0 points within the collision that harmonizes and transmutes. And 9 times out of 10 on Earth, that is through play. So that's what I'm about to go do, and maybe you should too.